At a small gas station in a quiet town, a German shepherd sits beside an old wooden bench, his eyes fixed on the road as if waiting for someone. Day after day, rain or shine, he remains in the same spot, never moving, never leaving. For 5 long years, he has been waiting. But who is he waiting for? And what secret has kept him there all this time? Stay with us to uncover a chilling truth that changes everything. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over Silver Creek, a small town nestled in the heart of New Mexico's vast desert landscape. The air was thick with the scent of dust and asphalt, a dry heat rolling in waves off the quiet 2-lane highway that cut through the town like an old scar. Just beyond the road stood Jim's Gas and Service, an old gas station that had seen better days. The sign above the roof had once been painted bright red, but years of sun and desert wind had faded it to a dull shade of rust. The fuel pumps were relics of a bygone era, their metal casings chipped and worn, but still working, still serving the occasional trucker or weary traveler passing through. It wasn't much, but for the people of Silver Creek, it was a landmark, a place where small-town news spread faster than the wind, where coffee was always brewing, and where a single German shepherd had stood guard for as long as anyone could remember. The unwavering sentinel. The dog sat near the entrance of the gas station's small convenience store, right beside a weathered wooden bench that creaked in the breeze. Shadow, that's what the townsfolk called him. No one knew his real name, if he had one at all. He never left. Rain, snow, heat, he remained in the exact same spot, staring at the road as if expecting something or someone to appear from the horizon. His coat, once a proud mix of black and tan, was now dull and dust-covered, with streaks of grey creeping around his muzzle. But despite the wear of time, Shadow remained alert. Each time a car passed, his ears twitched. Each time a person stepped out, his eyes scanned their face. And each time disappointment flickered across his features before he lowered his head once more. The town's ghost story. Silver Creek wasn't a bustling town, but it wasn't completely dead either. The occasional truckers made pit stops, locals came and went, and every so often tourists would pass through on their way to bigger places. And every single one of them noticed Shadow. For 5 years, his presence had become a legend. Children whispered stories about him at school. The diner waitress across the street, Martha, often glanced at him through the window while serving coffee, wondering what kept him there. Rumors spread. Some said he was waiting for a master who had abandoned him. Others believed his owner had died, and he never moved on. The most persistent story, though, was the one that no one could prove, but everyone believed. That Shadow had once belonged to a young soldier, one who had left one day and never returned. And that, even after all these years, Shadow still hadn't given up hope. Jim and his quiet companion. The owner of the gas station, a grizzled man named Jim, had been watching over Shadow for years. He never tried to leash him, never tried to force him to leave. He just let him be. At first, Jim had assumed the dog would move on eventually, but the days turned into weeks, then months, then years. And Shadow, he never budged. Jim made sure he had fresh water in a metal bowl near the gas pumps and left out scraps whenever the diner had extra food. He never said much to the dog. He wasn't the type for sentimental talk. But he made sure Shadow knew he wasn't alone, even if the person he was waiting for never came back. The eyes that have seen too much. It wasn't just Shadow's presence that unsettled people. It was his eyes. They weren't like most dogs. There was no careless joy, no playfulness. Instead, they held something deeper, recognition, understanding, a sorrow that spoke louder than words. Anyone who had spent enough time around Shadow knew the truth. He wasn't just lost. He wasn't just waiting. He was remembering. The day that changed everything. And then one day, a man arrived. Not a local, not a trucker, not a passing tourist. A man who carried the weight of his own ghosts. A black Ford Bronco rumbled down the road, its tires kicking up dust as it pulled into the gas station. The vehicle was old but sturdy, its body covered in the grime of long miles traveled. When the engine cut off, the driver's side door creaked open. Out stepped Logan Carter. A man in his late 30s, his presence carried the quiet tension of someone who had seen too much, lived too hard, and yet still kept moving. His dark brown hair was messy from the wind, a few strands falling over his forehead. His jaw was shadowed by days of unshaven stubble, and his steel blue eyes scanned the station with the cautious awareness of someone who had once learned to always be on guard. He wasn't here by choice. His trip was supposed to take him straight to Arizona, where an assignment awaited, an investigative piece on abandoned animals in small towns. He hadn't planned to stop in Silver Creek, but fate had other ideas. A connection without words. As Logan stretched his tired limbs, his gaze fell on Shadow. The two locked eyes. For a second, neither of them moved. Something about the way Shadow looked at him sent an unexpected shiver down Logan's spine. This wasn't just a stray dog sitting outside a gas station. This was something else, something deeper, something that Logan recognized. The ghosts that linger. Shadow's gaze was haunted. It was a look Logan had seen in too many war-ravaged faces, in men who had lost their brothers on the battlefield, in friends who had made it home but never really left the war behind. And now, he was seeing it in this dog. Logan swallowed hard, shaking the feeling off. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was just his past creeping in, as it always did when he least expected it. But somehow Logan knew. This wasn't just another stop on his journey. This was the beginning of something he couldn't walk away from. He's been here for 5 years. Jim's voice was steady, almost matter-of-fact, as he poured steaming black coffee into a ceramic mug that had seen better days. The scent of roasted beans mixed with the faint aroma of gasoline that lingered in the air, a combination that seemed to belong uniquely to gas stations like this. Logan, standing by the counter, froze mid-sip. 5 years. The words settled in his mind like a weight. He had assumed Shadow was just another stray, another forgotten soul left to wander, but 5 years, that wasn't just waiting. That was something else entirely. Logan turned his gaze back toward the door, where the German shepherd sat unmoving by the old wooden bench. Outside, the last of the evening light cast long shadows across the cracked pavement, stretching out like memories that refused to fade. 5 years? Waiting for what? Or for who? He set the coffee down and looked at Jim. Who did he belong to? Jim sighed, leaning against the counter. That's the thing nobody really knows. A story pieced together. Jim wiped his hands on a faded cloth, as if trying to clean away years of unanswered questions. We used to see them together every morning, he said. Shadow and this young guy, a soldier, I think, used to come in for coffee, sit on that bench outside while the dog lay next to him. Always the same routine. Logan felt something tighten in his chest. And then? Jim shrugged. One day the guy just didn't show up. Silence stretched between them. The kind of silence that came when a story had no ending. Logan turned back toward the window. Shadow was still there, still watching the road. He never left after that day. The photograph. Jim exhaled, then reached under the counter. Hold on, he muttered, pulling open an old wooden drawer. A few seconds later, he set a faded photograph on the counter. Logan leaned in. The image was slightly worn at the edges, the ink starting to fade, but the moment it captured remained untouched by time. A young man in military fatigues knelt beside a German shepherd, one hand resting gently on the dog's head. The way Shadow looked at him, a gaze full of trust, full of something deeper, it told Logan everything he needed to know. He swallowed hard. Who took this? Jim smirked slightly. Funny story. A tourist snapped it. Said he'd never seen anything like it before. This guy and his dog, just sitting there like nothing else in the world mattered. Thought it was some kind of perfect picture of loyalty, you know? So he took the shot. Logan studied the photograph. There was something almost hauntingly still about it. Jim continued. A few months later, the tourist came back through town, said he printed a copy and thought I should have it, figured it belonged here since that was the last place he saw them together. Jim shook his head. Didn't think much of it at the time, but now feels like a piece of something bigger. A name lost to time. Logan picked up the photo, running his thumb over its surface. Does he have a name? Jim hesitated, then shook his head. Some of the folks around here tried to remember, but no one really knew him that well. He wasn't from here. He just showed up one day, and then he was gone. Logan's grip on the photo tightened. The military uniform, the look in the soldier's eyes. Logan knew that look. It was the look of someone who had seen war but hadn't let it take everything from him. The kind of man who still had something worth holding on to. The weight of devotion. Logan exhaled and turned his gaze back to Shadow. Even now, as the night crept in and the last streaks of daylight began to fade, the dog remained where he was. Never moving, never leaving. His devotion stretched across 5 years, 5 years of waiting, and the way he still watched the road, still lifted his head every time a car passed, he still hadn't given up hope. Logan felt his throat tighten. He had seen loyalty before, in the battlefield, in the men who would have died for each other, in the silent nods exchanged between soldiers who knew that tomorrow wasn't guaranteed. But this was something else. The unfinished story. Jim tapped the counter, breaking Logan from his thoughts. Crazy, ain't it? Jim said. A dog waiting that long. I don't know what he thinks he's going to find, but he's still out there, same as always. Logan stared at the photograph one last time before setting it back down. Something in his chest stirred uneasily. This wasn't just a gas station ghost story, it was real. It was unfinished. And Logan couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant to be here, meant to see this. He wasn't just passing through anymore. Shadow's story wasn't over yet, and for the first time in 5 years, something was about to change. The morning air in Silver Creek was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh coffee and the distant hum of a world that never truly stopped moving. The streets weren't bustling, but the heart of the town, the small diner called Martha's Place, was already alive with murmurs of conversation, the clinking of ceramic cups, and the occasional laughter of regulars who had been coming here for decades. Logan pushed open the door, the small brass bell above it jingling softly. The interior smelled of brewed coffee, maple syrup, and something faintly nostalgic, like a place frozen in time. A few older men sat at their usual table, talking about the upcoming county fair, while a couple of truckers occupied a booth near the window, staring at their phones as they nursed their morning caffeine. But Logan wasn't here for coffee. He pulled out the faded photograph Jim had given him, gripping it between his fingers as he scanned the room. His gaze landed on a woman behind the counter. She was in her late 60s, her silver hair neatly tied into a bun, her apron dusted with flour from the morning's baking. Her face carried the warmth of someone who had lived long enough to see the town change but had never lost her kindness. This had to be Martha. Taking a deep breath, Logan walked up to the counter. A name finally given. Martha looked up, offering a polite smile. Haven't seen you around before. What can I get you, hun? Logan set the photograph down on the counter instead of answering. Martha's eyes flickered to it. Her smile faltered. For a moment, the entire diner seemed to pause. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the photo, her fingers tracing the edges with a softness that spoke of recognition, of something lost, but never forgotten. Daniel Lawson, she said quietly. Logan straightened. You knew him? Martha nodded slowly, her expression unreadable, as if she were sifting through memories she hadn't touched in a long time. He used to come in here every morning, she said. Always sat at that booth by the window, same one you're standing next to now. Ordered black coffee and toast, no butter, just plain. Said it reminded him of being overseas. Logan glanced at the booth. The leather seat was worn, cracked at the edges from years of use. Daniel had sat there day after day while Shadow had waited outside. And Shadow? Logan asked. Martha smiled faintly. That dog was his shadow, all right. Never saw one without the other. You could tell, just by the way he looked at Daniel, that there wasn't anything in the world he wouldn't do for him. Logan felt something tighten in his chest. A soldier, a dog, a routine, a bond that never should have been broken. But it had been. The last goodbye. Logan slid into the booth, resting his arms on the table. So what happened? Martha hesitated. She glanced around the diner, as if making sure no one was listening. The other patrons were lost in their own conversations, oblivious to the weight of the moment. Finally, she exhaled and leaned in slightly. One day, he was just gone. Logan's fingers curled into a fist. Gone where? Martha's gaze turned distant. I remember it clear as day, she said. He came in that morning, like always, sat right there, ordered his coffee. Shadow was outside, watching through the window like usual. But Daniel was different that day. Quiet, real quiet. He didn't talk to anyone, didn't even look up from his cup. Then, when he finished his coffee, he stood up, walked to the door. Martha paused, her lips pressing together as if saying the next part physically hurt her. And then he did something he'd never done before. Logan leaned in. What? Martha's voice was barely above a whisper. He didn't look back at Shadow. The words hit Logan like a punch to the chest. Did he say anything to anyone? Logan asked. Martha shook her head. Not a word. Just left a few bills on the table, walked out the door, and got on a bus heading out of town. A chill ran through Logan's spine. And he never came back. Martha's eyes softened with something close to regret. No, honey, he never did. The dog that never stopped waiting. Logan looked toward the window. Outside, Shadow was still there, still waiting, still looking down the road like he expected Daniel to step off that bus and come back for him. 5 years of watching, waiting, hoping, 5 years of loyalty that had gone unanswered. Logan exhaled, rubbing his face. He just left. Martha hesitated. I don't think it was that simple. Logan glanced up. What do you mean? Martha sighed, looking around as if debating whether to say the next words aloud. Finally, she leaned closer, lowering her voice. I think Daniel knew he wasn't coming back. A lump formed in Logan's throat. Why? Martha shook her head. I wish I knew, sweetheart, but something about that morning felt final, like he'd made a decision he couldn't take back. Logan's fingers traced the edge of the coffee cup in front of him. A soldier who never said goodbye, a dog who refused to forget. It didn't make sense. Why leave? Why not at least say something? Unless Daniel knew something that no one else did. A trail of questions. Martha gave Logan a long look. You're not just passing through, are you? Logan smirked faintly. I was. Martha's knowing expression didn't waver. And now? Logan glanced down at the photograph in his hands. A young man and his dog. A moment frozen in time. A story left unfinished. Logan had seen plenty of things in his life that didn't have neat endings. But this wasn't just a story. This was a promise that had never been broken. And now he had to find out why. Logan had seen his fair share of government buildings, sterile, impersonal, filled with the scent of old paper and bureaucratic indifference. The Veterans Affairs office in Santa Fe was no different. A faded American flag hung on the wall behind the front desk, curling slightly at the edges from years of neglect. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a dull glow over rows of file cabinets and outdated computer monitors. The receptionist, a woman in her late 50s with glasses perched low on her nose, barely looked up when Logan approached the counter. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice flat, rehearsed from years of repeating the same question. Logan slid Daniel's photograph across the counter. "I'm looking for information on this man. His name was Daniel Lawson, former Army, Afghanistan." The woman adjusted her glasses, glanced at the photo, then at Logan. "You family?" Logan hesitated, then shook his head. No, just following up on something. She pursed her lips, her expression unreadable, then motioned toward a row of chairs. Wait here. Logan sat, stretching his legs out as he let his gaze wander over the room. A bulletin board near the entrance was pinned with missing persons flyers, veteran support group notices, and a faded list of names under the heading, Those We Have Lost. Daniel's name wasn't there, not yet. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour before the receptionist finally returned, holding a thin manila folder. She set it on the counter, tapping a finger against the cover. Daniel Lawson, killed in action, July 2018. The words hit Logan harder than expected. He exhaled slowly, nodding. Any next of kin? The woman shook her head. No listed family, no emergency contact. No one claimed his belongings after his death. No one. Logan felt his chest tighten. Daniel had no one. No one except a dog sitting by a gas station waiting for an owner who would never return. Can I see the full report? Logan asked, his voice quieter now. The woman hesitated, then sighed. I can't give you classified details, but I can let you read the basic file. Keep it here, though. No copies. She slid the folder toward him, and Logan opened it carefully. The final mission. The file contained the usual military records, date of enlistment, rank, deployment history. Daniel had been stationed in Afghanistan with an infantry unit. He had completed 2 tours and was nearing the end of his contract when his unit was caught in an IED explosion during a convoy mission. The words on the page were clinical, emotionless. Sustained fatal injuries, declared deceased on site. Logan swallowed. He had read reports like this before. Too many. There were no details about how he had spent his last moments. No mention of what he might have said, or if he had thought of home, or if he had imagined Shadow waiting for him by that gas station. Just sustained fatal injuries, as if that summed up an entire life. Logan clenched his jaw. It wasn't enough. There had to be something more. He flipped through the remaining documents. A military-issued photograph of Daniel was clipped to the corner of one page. It was different from the one Jim had. This one was taken for records, and Daniel's face was stiff, expression neutral, his green fatigues crisp and clean. But Logan recognized the same eyes, the same quiet strength, the same man who had once sat by a wooden bench with his dog, sipping coffee, unaware that it would be the last routine he ever had. Logan kept reading. Then, near the bottom of the final page, he found something that made his stomach twist. Personal effects. 1 wristwatch, military ID, and a handwritten letter. A letter. But no one had ever claimed it. No family, no one to send it to. It had been sitting in some forgotten government storage room, collecting dust, just like Daniel's memory. And just like Shadow, it had been left behind. Logan ran a hand over his face, forcing himself to breathe. Where are his belongings now? He asked. The receptionist hesitated. Probably still in storage at the base where he was processed. It's not uncommon for unclaimed effects to sit for years before being transferred elsewhere. Logan exhaled. Can I request access? She gave him a measured look. You're not family, so it'll be difficult. But... She paused, then softened slightly. You might have better luck if you went in person. Fort Carson handles most of the records for soldiers from this region. Logan nodded, standing. Thanks. As he turned to leave, she called after him. Hey! Logan stopped. She glanced at the photo of Daniel still sitting on the counter, then back at Logan. You didn't know him, did you? Logan looked at the photo for a long moment before answering. No, he said quietly, but someone did. And that someone was still waiting. The dog that never forgot. The drive back to Silver Creek was long, the sun beginning to set as Logan pulled into Jim's gas and service once more. Shadow was still there, still sitting by the same wooden bench, his ears twitching as Logan's truck rolled in, but his eyes never leaving the road. Logan sat in his truck for a moment, just watching him. The file from the Veterans Affairs office still sat on the passenger seat, but it told only half the story. The rest of it? It was sitting right in front of him. A dog who had waited 5 years for someone who would never come back. Shadow never knew what happened to Daniel. He only knew that one morning his person got on a bus and never returned. And somehow, deep in his heart, he was still holding on to the belief that one day he would. Logan clenched his jaw, stepping out of the truck. Shadow lifted his head slightly as Logan approached, but he didn't move. Carefully, Logan knelt down in front of him. "I found him," Logan said softly. Shadow didn't react at first. Then his ears flicked slightly. Logan exhaled, resting his arms on his knees. "He's not coming back, buddy." Shadow stared at him, his deep amber eyes impossibly tired, impossibly full of something that Logan couldn't name. He reached out, hesitating just for a second before placing his hand gently on Shadow's head. The dog didn't pull away. For the first time in 5 years, someone had finally spoken the truth aloud. Daniel was gone. Shadow had been waiting for a ghost. And Logan had a decision to make, because the only thing worse than losing someone you loved was being the one left behind. The night had settled over Silver Creek, blanketing the quiet town in a cool stillness. The hum of distant crickets filled the air, interrupted only by the occasional passing truck rolling down the highway. The neon sign of Jim's Gas and Service flickered softly in the darkness, its glow illuminating the cracked pavement below. Logan sat on the worn wooden bench, his elbows resting on his knees, his fingers loosely clasped together. Shadow was beside him, in his usual spot, his body motionless except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. The gas station was empty. No customers, no cars, just a man and a dog, both burdened by a past that refused to fade. Logan exhaled, staring at the road stretching endlessly into the horizon. "He's not coming back, Shadow." His voice was low, steady, yet heavy with something deeper. Shadow didn't react, didn't lift his head, didn't shift his weight. He only continued to watch the road, his gaze locked onto the darkness, as if willing a ghost to return. Logan ran a hand over his face. 5 years, 5 years of waiting, 5 years of hoping, 5 years of staring down a road that had never given anything back. Maybe, in some way, Shadow had always known. Maybe, deep down, he had felt it, the way Daniel had walked away that morning, the way he hadn't looked back, the way the air had carried something final in it, and yet knowing wasn't the same as accepting, because hope had a way of refusing to die. Logan understood that too well. He had been Shadow once, a soldier who had spent too many nights waiting for a voice on the radio that never came, a man who had searched faces in crowded streets, hoping to see someone who had been left behind long ago. He had lived in that same endless loop, the same cycle of remembering and refusing to let go. And now Shadow was still caught in it. Logan reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out the dog tag he had taken from Daniel's file earlier that day. He turned it over in his palm, tracing the letters. Lawson, Daniel, U.S. Army. It felt wrong that this was all that remained of him, a piece of metal, a name etched into something cold and unfeeling. Daniel had been more than this. He had been a man who laughed at bad coffee. A man who sat on this very bench with his dog at his feet. A man who had once promised Shadow something Logan would never fully understand. And now Logan was holding the last tangible proof that Daniel had ever existed. But there was still one more piece missing. The letter. Unfinished words. Logan had made some calls earlier that evening, pushing until he found someone at Fort Carson who owed him a favor. Daniel's unclaimed personal effects had still been in storage, a watch, an old pocket knife, and a sealed envelope tucked away for 5 years. The soldier on the phone had read the first few words aloud. "If something happens to me, and this letter reaches someone I trust, please." That was all Logan needed to hear. Now the letter sat in his hands, yellowed at the edges, unopened. Jim had offered him a place inside to read it, but Logan had refused. It didn't belong in a gas station. It belonged here, under the same night sky Shadow had spent years watching. Carefully, Logan tore the envelope open, unfolding the paper inside. The handwriting was slightly rushed, as if written in the dim light of a barracks, the ink pressed hard into the page. He took a steadying breath and began to read. Daniel's final words. If something happens to me, and this letter reaches someone I trust, please don't let him wait for me forever. His name is Shadow. He's not just a dog, he's family. He was there when I had no one. He kept me going when I wanted to quit. He deserves more than an empty road and a promise I couldn't keep. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. And if Shadow is still waiting for me, please take him somewhere safe. Give him the life I always meant to. Tell him I'm sorry. And tell him I never forgot him. Logan's fingers tightened around the paper. A lump formed in his throat, heavy and unrelenting. Daniel had known. Maybe not the exact moment, maybe not the details, but deep down he had known he wasn't coming back. And yet, he had still walked onto that bus, leaving behind the one soul who had loved him unconditionally. Not because he wanted to, but because he had no other choice. And Shadow? Shadow had never known why. He had only known that one morning Daniel had left and never returned. A choice that couldn't wait. Logan folded the letter carefully, placing it back into the envelope. His chest ached. Not just for Daniel, not just for what he had lost, but for Shadow too, for the dog who had been waiting through storms and scorching heat, through years that had stolen his youth, but never his loyalty. Logan exhaled. Then, for the first time, he reached out and placed a hand on Shadow's head. The dog flinched slightly, unused to the touch, but he didn't pull away. Logan let his fingers sink into the thick fur, feeling the tension beneath the surface. He didn't speak at first. There was nothing left to say. Then, after a long pause, his voice came low, steady. "It's time to go, buddy." Shadow didn't move, didn't shift, didn't acknowledge the words, but Logan knew he had heard them. And this time, for the first time in 5 years, Shadow wasn't completely alone, because someone had come back for him, and this time he wouldn't be left behind. The sun was dipping low over Silver Creek, casting long golden streaks across the pavement in front of Jim's gas and service. The heat of the day had begun to fade, replaced by the cool breath of an approaching evening. Logan stood near the truck, holding a faded leather leash in his hands. Shadow sat a few feet away, unmoving, his amber eyes locked onto the road. The wind ruffled his thick fur, but he didn't flinch. He never flinched. Jim leaned against the doorway of the station, arms crossed, watching the quiet standoff between man and dog. "You really think he'll go with you?" Jim asked, his tone skeptical. Logan exhaled slowly. "I have to try." Jim nodded, but there was something knowing in his expression. Shadow had spent 5 years locked in a battle against time. And the hardest thing about being a soldier wasn't the fight itself. It was leaving the battlefield behind. The leash that bound more than a dog. Logan crouched down a few feet from Shadow, holding the leash loosely in one hand. "Come on, buddy," he said softly. "Let's go." Shadow didn't move. Logan let out a slow breath, lowering his voice. "I know it's hard. I know it feels like if you leave, he won't find you." Nothing. Not even a flicker of recognition. Logan pressed his lips together, fingers tightening around the leash. He had seen this before. Men frozen in place, still hearing the echoes of voices long gone. Soldiers who had returned home but never truly left the war behind. Shadow had been fighting his own battle for 5 years. And now Logan was asking him to surrender, to walk away from the last piece of Daniel he had left. Shadow finally moved, just a twitch of his ears, a slight shift in his posture, a sign that he was listening. Encouraged, Logan reached forward and carefully clipped the leash onto Shadow's worn collar. The metal clasp clicked into place. It felt final, like a door closing. For a brief second, Logan thought it might work. That Shadow might understand. Then, in an instant, Shadow bolted. The weight of waiting. The leash ripped from Logan's hands, the leather snapping back as Shadow lunged away from him, straight to the wooden bench. Logan's chest clenched. Shadow stood in front of the bench, facing the road, tail stiff, body rigid with something close to defiance. His message was clear: I can't leave. Jim sighed from the doorway. It's not that he doesn't want to go, Logan. It's that he can't. Logan ran a hand through his hair, watching as Shadow lowered himself to the ground, placing his head between his paws. He wasn't just resting. He was anchoring himself to this place, to this memory, to the hope that if he just stayed a little longer, Daniel would come back. Jim stepped forward, arms still crossed over his chest. His voice was softer this time. He only ever trusted one person, and that person isn't here anymore. The words sank deep into Logan's chest, wrapping around something raw inside of him. He knew this feeling. He had been here before, not in Silver Creek, not at this gas station, but in the years after his own war, sitting alone in a bar with a drink he didn't really want, waking up in motel rooms that weren't home, watching the empty chair across from him, waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. Jim's words weren't just about Shadow. They were about him too. The ghosts we carry. Shadow hadn't spent 5 years waiting for nothing. He had spent 5 years waiting because he didn't know what else to do. Logan had seen men like that, had been a man like that. Men who got stuck between what was and what could never be again. Men who built their lives around ghosts, refusing to walk away because it felt like walking away meant forgetting. And Logan knew one thing with certainty: you couldn't fight a ghost, not with words, not with logic, not even with time. The only way to move forward was to bring the past with you without letting it keep you in place. And maybe, just maybe, Shadow needed to know that too. A promise that had to be kept. Logan stood, brushing the dust off his knees. He didn't walk toward Shadow this time. Instead, he sat down on the bench beside him. Shadow lifted his head slightly, watching him from the corner of his eye. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Logan pulled something from his pocket. Daniel's dog tag. He placed it gently on the bench between them. A piece of Daniel. A reminder that leaving this place didn't mean leaving him behind. Shadow's ears twitched. Logan let his gaze drift toward the horizon. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and purple, the last remnants of daylight sinking behind the hills. The road stretched out in front of them, endless and unknown. "You're not forgetting him," Logan said finally, "but he wouldn't have wanted you to spend forever waiting. He left you something better than this." Shadow's tail flicked slightly. Encouraged, Logan took a breath. "He left you his trust, and a promise that if he couldn't come back, someone would." He reached down again, placing his hand on Shadow's head. This time Shadow didn't flinch, didn't pull away, didn't run. Instead, he simply let out a deep breath, one that sounded like it had been sitting inside him for years. Logan let his fingers sink into the thick fur, grounding himself there, in that moment. Because he wasn't just talking to Shadow anymore, he was talking to himself. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for both of them to stop waiting. A step toward tomorrow. The evening wind rustled the gas station sign, making it creak softly above them. Shadow didn't move, but he didn't run back to the road either. For the first time in 5 years he had hesitated, and sometimes hesitation was the first step toward letting go. Logan exhaled, standing up. He gave the leash one more gentle pull. This time Shadow didn't fight. He didn't rush forward, but he also didn't pull away. He just sat there, looking at the road one last time. Then, slowly, he turned toward Logan. And together, for the first time in 5 years, they took a step forward. The desert sky stretched endlessly above them, vast and infinite, scattered with 1,000 silent stars. The world had gone still. The only sounds were the whisper of wind through the dry grass and the occasional rustle of an animal in the distance. Logan sat beside the old wooden bench, his back against the gas station wall, legs stretched out in front of him. Shadow lay curled at his side, his body warm against the cool night air. It had taken time, But when Logan had finally decided to stop pulling on the leash, Shadow had followed him on his own. Not far, just to the other side of the bench, where Logan had dropped onto the pavement with a quiet sigh. Now they sat together, watching the stars in comfortable silence. Logan pulled his worn military jacket tighter around himself. He had spent so many nights just like this, under foreign skies, listening to the sound of distant gunfire or the hushed murmurs of soldiers trying to push away the darkness. But tonight there was only quiet. Shadow shifted beside him. Logan glanced down. The dog was staring at him. For the first time since they had met, Shadow wasn't looking at the road. Logan held his gaze. Neither of them spoke, but neither of them had to. Because trust wasn't built on words, it was built on quiet moments like this. And in this moment, beneath a sky Daniel had never gotten to see again, Shadow made his choice. He took one slow step forward, then another. And finally, he rested his head on Logan's leg. Logan stilled. He could feel the warmth of Shadow's breath against his knee, the weight of a heart that had spent 5 years beating for a ghost. Slowly, carefully, Logan lifted a hand and ran it through Shadow's thick fur. Shadow didn't flinch, didn't pull away, didn't run back to the road. For the first time in 5 years, Shadow had let someone in. Logan swallowed the knot forming in his throat, blinking up at the sky. Maybe Daniel was out there somewhere, watching. Maybe he had waited for this, too. The quiet before the dawn. They stayed like that for hours. Logan's fingers moved absently through Shadow's fur as the night stretched on, endless and patient. Every so often Shadow would shift slightly, letting out a deep, steady breath. It was the sound of something unraveling, something letting go. At some point, Logan let his own eyes close. The exhaustion of a life spent carrying too much weight finally caught up with him. And for the first time in a long time, he let himself rest. Let himself believe, even for a moment, that tomorrow might be different, that they might finally be moving forward, that Shadow had found a reason to stop waiting. The moment the world stood still. The first hint of dawn painted the sky in soft hues of pink and blue, bleeding into the fading darkness like a whispered promise. A chill hung in the air, the kind that came before the desert heat would rise again. Logan stirred. His fingers twitched slightly against Shadow's fur, but Shadow didn't move. The warmth at his side felt different now. Still. Too still. Logan's breath caught. His fingers tightened slightly against Shadow's coat. "Buddy!" Nothing. No flicker of an ear, no twitch of a tail, no breath rising beneath his palm. Logan's stomach hollowed out. He sat up slowly, his throat tight, his hands suddenly too light, too empty. Shadow lay curled beside him, his head still resting where it had fallen against Logan's leg, as if even in sleep he had refused to leave. The wind rustled through the dry desert grass, filling the silence that stretched too wide, too heavy. Logan swallowed hard. "Shadow!" His voice was barely above a whisper, but Shadow didn't hear him, not anymore. A goodbye that was never spoken. Logan didn't move for a long time. His fingers remained tangled in Shadow's fur, unwilling to let go, because this wasn't just an end. It was a homecoming. Shadow had waited for 5 years, had fought against time, against loneliness, against the weight of what he had lost. And now, at last, he had let himself rest, not alone, not waiting, but beside someone who had understood, who had stayed. Logan let out a slow, shaky breath, staring down at the dog who had never given up. The sun was rising now, spilling golden light over the quiet world. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere beyond that horizon, Daniel was waiting, finally ready to take his friend home. The news spread fast in Silver Creek. By the time the sun had fully risen over the quiet town, people had already begun gathering at Jim's gas and service, speaking in hushed voices, their gazes drifting toward the empty space beside the old wooden bench. Shadow was gone. For 5 years he had been a part of this place, a silent guardian, a constant presence. And now his watch had finally ended. No one spoke about it outright, but there was a heaviness in the air, a quiet mourning that lingered in the way people slowed down when they passed by, in the way the bench no longer seemed like just another forgotten piece of town history. Logan watched from the side, hands in his pockets, as Martha wiped at her eyes with the corner of her apron, as Jim stood in the doorway of the gas station, nodding at each person who stopped to pay their silent respects. It wasn't just Shadow's loss they were grieving. It was the story he had carried, a story that had stretched across 5 years, across the endless highway, across the spaces between waiting and remembering. A tribute to the one who waited. A week later, the town gathered at the same spot. At the center of it all was a small bronze statue, placed just beside the bench where Shadow had spent so many years watching the road. The artist, one of the locals who had grown up with the sight of Shadow every morning, had captured his likeness perfectly. Head held high, ears perked slightly, his gaze fixed toward the distance, waiting, just as he always had. Someone had placed a plaque at the base of the statue. It read, "For Shadow, who never stopped waiting, never stopped loving, the bravest soldier Silver Creek has ever known." Jim stood beside Logan, arms crossed. He let out a quiet huff. "Didn't think I'd ever see the day," he muttered. "Never thought people would stop for a dog like this." Logan gave a small, tired smile. "He wasn't just a dog." Jim nodded once. "No, he was family." A story that needed to be told. Logan had spent the last few days writing. Not for an assignment, not for a paycheck, just because some stories needed to be told. And this was one of them. His article, "The Dog Who Never Stopped Waiting," started as a small feature for a veteran's journal. But within days, it spread, first through state newspapers, then through national headlines. People read about Shadow, about Daniel, about 5 years of unwavering loyalty. And something in the world shifted. Letters poured in from across the country, veterans who had left someone behind, families who had lost their own loyal companions, people who had never met Shadow or Daniel, but somehow understood exactly what it meant to love someone who was never coming home. One morning, Logan's inbox flooded with messages. A publisher, a documentary crew, a military memorial foundation. They all wanted to know more, wanted to make sure the story lived on. And Logan, for the first time in years, didn't hesitate, because this wasn't just Shadow's story. It was Daniel's. It was his own. It was every soldier who had ever walked away without looking back. Not alone anymore. Months passed. The statue became a part of Silver Creek, a place where travelers would stop, lay down flowers, read the inscription. Jim made sure the bench was always clean. Martha kept a small tin of dog treats beside the counter, as if some part of her still expected Shadow to come trotting in. And Logan kept writing. He didn't leave Silver Creek, not right away. Some part of him felt rooted here now, tied to the quiet streets, the people who had taken Shadow into their hearts. He visited the bench often, sometimes sitting for hours without saying a word. And when he looked at the bronze statue, at the way it seemed to stand watchful, patient, he realized something. Shadow had never really been alone, not in life, not in the end, and certainly not now. Because now, when people passed by and saw his story, they didn't just see a dog. They saw love, they saw loyalty, they saw a soldier who had finally come home. The reunion. One night, as the wind whispered through the quiet streets of Silver Creek, Logan looked up at the stars, the same endless sky Shadow had spent years watching. And somewhere out there, in a place beyond roads, beyond waiting, maybe Daniel was finally there, standing with open arms. Maybe after 5 long years, Shadow had finally found his way home. Some loves never fade, some promises need no words. Shadow's story is not just about a dog, it's about loyalty, devotion, and the silent vows we make to those we hold dear. He waited through storms and scorching heat, through seasons that changed but never took away his hope. He never knew why Daniel didn't come back, but he never stopped believing in their bond. And isn't that what love truly is? not measured by time, but by the unwavering commitment to never forget. But as much as love endures, time moves forward, and the hardest truth of all is that no one can wait forever. So if there's someone in your life who has been waiting for your call, your visit, your time, don't make them wait any longer. Cherish the ones who love you, because one day time will run out, and when it does, make sure the people who matter know they were never waiting in vain. If Shadow's story touched your heart, share it. Let it remind the world that love, loyalty, and faithfulness still exist. And if you've ever had a companion, human or animal, who never gave up on you, tell us their story in the comments. Let's honor the ones who loved us unconditionally. Let's make sure their loyalty was never forgotten.